SCG Women Network. So today, Elodie will present from oil and gas to carbon storage and what can bring to sustainable future. So Elodie's career spans from reservoir engineering on iconic fields like Ecofish to R&D roles at CGG, now Veridian, where she worked on permanent reservoir monitoring system to advance time-lapse seismic technology. And this journey culminated in the creation of Spotlight, which is the company she co-founded and where she is the CTO. It is a startup reshaping TCC monitoring with solutions aligned to strict regulatory requirements. Elodie, the floor is yours, and if you want to have some things, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Loisa. Thank you for having me here. So I've prepared some slides and I would like for you to be able to interact, but as much as you wish during this presentation, because I don't particularly enjoy talking to myself for half an hour. So please just raise your hand, ask a question. And if you want me to dive a little bit more on a specific subject, let's speak about it. So today, my subject is, rethinking geophysics for a sustainable future. And I did this subject last month. And first, I will start with a quick introduction about myself to tell you why I think I'm the right person to talk about innovation and how to go from the oil and gas industry toward the CCS industry. So first, quick journey. I am French, as you can tell from my accent. I began studying in Polytech Sorbonne and IAE de Paris, here in Paris, and I'm still located in Paris. I have a 2 master degree, one in geophysics and signal processing, and one in business administration. I started working for CGG, now Veridian, in signal processing and permanent reservoir monitoring, and it was really a great experience. I had the chance to meet a lot of people, and amongst them, I had the chance to meet my business associate today, and we've created the company together 8 years ago when I was 25 years old, which is Spotlight, the CCS surveillance company. We started Spotlight, yes, it was 8 years ago in the oil and gas business. And in the end, today, we are working purely on CCS. To tell you just a bit more about myself, I have some values that you can see in this journey. During all of this path, I was always looking to enjoy my work and what I was doing. I want to have an impact, and I want to see that my action have a result. And I've always been curious. I always wanted to work more, to work in impactful kind of industries, and that's why I've begun working in the oil and gas industry. We all know that from a geopolitical point of view, the oil and gas industry is at the center of many things. So that's why the oil and gas was so attractive to me. But we all know that we are in a specific transition and in an energy transition phase. And that's why today I feel more aligned with my values and what I want to leave as an impact in this world, because I'm specializing on the CCS industry. And I'm using all the things that I've learned from the oil and gas to make the CCS industry, well, a reality today. So, to begin with, on the CCS industry, this is an industry that had a few setbacks from maybe 20 years. We saw a huge increase in the last years, since 2-3 years, and Spotlight decided to go purely on CCS 4 years ago. We took this decision because we saw that the CCS industry was in need of specific technologies, and we have to really be purely involved in this business to be able to think about the best solution and to build this industry from the ground. And we need to think differently from the oil and gas industry to do so. So this is the growth in the US, but that was even before we had some huge announcement. We saw the latest strategy from ExxonMobil talking about electricity and AI and how they want to fuel data center with an energy that would be carbon free, using oil and gas and storing CO2 in the ground. So CO2 storage is a reality that is not yet a reality. We need to make it happen at an industrial scale in North America, in Europe, and all over the world, so that we can still grow and have all of the activity needed to fuel the population, the new technology with the right level of energy. So that's for the CCS industry and how it's growing today. Now, how can we make this a reality? Well, when we are talking about CCS, even if we are still talking about geology, geophysics, and so on, we need to really understand the business behind it. We are not talking just about oil production, gas production with all of the challenge that we know today. We are talking about a new industry, and we have the CCS operator, true, but we must also be careful about the regulation and the social acceptability of this project. We need also to think about the certificator. How can we stamp that the CO2 is safely stored and that it will not go out in the atmosphere again? We need to convince insurances and banks that the CCS will be a viable industry in the future. So now how can they all agree to start a CCS project? Well, one thing is key when today we are creating a CCS project so that we can store for 10, 20, 30 years ahead. We all agree on one thing, which is the digital twin. The digital twin is still, it is still a model of what will happen. It's not yet a reality, but it's one model that is possible. So now, how can we validate it? So they still need to have a measurement, monitoring, and verification plan to validate that the first hypothesis of this CCS storage is still validated, that all of the studies that led to this CCS final investment decision was not for nothing, and that we know the behavior of the reservoir, we know the behavior of the CO2, and we can take actions when we need to take specific action on the field. So that's where geophysics comes into play. How can we provide monitoring solutions that will sustain for 30, 40, 50 years to come? We are used to work in the oil and gas industry, and I'm coming from the oil and gas industry. Well, I know about 4D seismic permanent reservoir monitoring. And what I know is that from a technical point of view, this is just marvelous what we can achieve with this kind of technologies. We can see what's happening in the subsurface from years to years, and even with some project, on a daily basis. But the truth is, from the oil and gas, the amount that we have to invest to have such technologies is realistic for the oil and gas, which is a resource. We need to find the oil that was not yet produced. So we invest in 4D seismic, we invest in PRM to find the remaining oil and gas into the ground and to produce more revenue out of it. But now, what about the CCS business? The CCS business is a waste management industry. but we will still store the CO2 in the same kind of formation. We will still store the CO2 with the same kind of risks, and we need to monitor what's happening. So can we really use the same technologies that were used for oil and gas and just apply them for the CCS industry? So I've been to a few conferences in the last years for CCS, and we've tried to propose 2D seismic, 3D seismic, short array kind of seismic, and at some point we faced challenges to make it a reality. Let's take an example. When we talk about the CCS industry, we talk about one area. Here you can see a map of Houston in Texas that you might recognize if you are from Houston. But let's say that we want to store CO2 there, and we have the right formation to do it, we have the right geology to do it. So we will perform first a 3D seismic. This 3D seismic will tell us that we can inject CO2 here. So we just have a few obstructions on the field, but that's not a big issue at that time. And we start building the CCS project. So we drill a well, we make an area of review assessment, and we see how much CO2 we can store and for how long. But then when it's come to monitoring, how can we monitor for 35 years of injection when a city is building well upon the storage? How can we still do a 3D seismic over this kind of area where we have so many buildings, so many habitation here? So that's where the huge technologies that we are using for the oil and gas are more and more difficult to use for CCS, because that's a lot of work. It's a lot of social acceptability to address, to be able to use this kind of technology. So we need to think differently. We need to adapt the way we are doing things, and we need to propose different kind of monitoring technology. Let's take an analogy to illustrate what we could do to monitor a CCS project. So here you can see that you can see a house, you can see an apartment, and what we want from a house is to prevent from a fire hazard. Here you could use several things. You could use thermal cameras to track in real time what's happening and how hot is a fire. Or you could use smoke detector. And one of these technologies are actually commonly used to detect a fire from happening into your house. We are all using smoke detector because we think that this is enough for the purpose we need. We just need to know, well, if a fire is happening and when we need to get out of the apartment. So in that case, we need to have several smoke detectors. And usually we have a few smoke detectors to locate, and we choose critical location to place them. So we choose to place them in the kitchen because the fire is most likely to start in this area. And we choose to locate them in the entrance, for example, because you want to know when you need to get out of the apartment, because this is the only issue. So here you can see that the thermal image could bring a lot of information of how the fire started in the house and so on. But actually, the only thing you need is to know if a fire is happening in the apartment. And I took this analogy on purpose because we could do the same for CO2 injection. We could also see the flow model output. We see where the CO2 must go. You can see on this video that the CO2 plume is evolving from the center of this area, and it's going towards the west side of the storage. And here you can see that you have some higher level of saturation, and this is where you want to have a verification of this flow model. So you want to have specific spots to identify where the CO2 is going and if the model that you had is correct. So it's all about the flow model and this digital twin I was talking about. How can you prove to the banks, to the regulation, certificator, and so on, that your model is actually accurate? By monitoring specific location, you can tell where you need to monitor your field, and you can also tell when you need to monitor your field. Here, we can see that in a year of CO2 injection, you have some critical time where you could acquire a monitor to see if the main hypotheses of the flow model output are actually accurate. So you can see on this map on the left, you have month number 5, which is the time where the CO2 is going towards the southwest of the field. And this is a hotspot for the CO2. If the CO2 is not at this location at month number 5, then you know something is wrong. Then you know that you have to update the model. Then you know that the velocity of the CO2 might not be the right one. So it gives you an information for you to trigger an action. And that's the whole purpose of having specific spot location. It's because when you detect CO2 at one of these locations, then you know you could decide to do something out of it. So now for the CO2, then you need to meet some requirements to monitor your field. You need to monitor frequently because we want to have information on the CO2 displacement in the reservoir frequently enough to take action and decisions. We want it to be sustainable. We are talking about CO2 storage, so we need to be mindful about the quantity of carbon that we are using. And we need to have societal acceptability to be able first to choose to have a CCS project and then to be able to monitor the CCS project efficiently. And of course, talking about waste management, you need to have a monitoring solution that is cost effective because you'll have to monitor for decades. So we need to think about geophysical solution to meet all of these objectives. And that's what we had with Spotlight. We are using only a few sets of receiver and sources to monitor specific spot location in the reservoir. So this is the personal nightmare of a geophysicist because we are not providing images. We are going backward from all of the tendency to have the highest resolution, to have the highest, the best image of the subsurface. We just say you need to monitor specific location in the subsurface so that you know early enough if the flow model is accurate or not. And we can do that because we have a 3D seismic first on the field or a 2D seismic. And then if you have that, you can use the spot seismic as a monitoring technology for CCS. So having only one source and one receiver per spot location is cost effective, obviously. And it's relatively light because you have only a few sets of source and receiver, and you can have the best acquisition possible because you can spend a little bit of time to have the best positioning of source and receiver and to have the best repeatability. Because we know when it comes to monitoring, it's all about repeatability. And of course, with such a few set of equipment, you can reach societal acceptability a little bit more easily than if you are using a full grid for a 3D seismic or a 4D seismic. So Spotlight here, the spot seismic that we are talking about, is not the full solution for the monitoring, measurement, and verification plan. It's not the one and only solution. It's one of the solutions that we can use first because it's cost effective and because it's light to know early enough what's going on there. And then, if something goes bad, then we could trigger other kind of action like VSP, 2D seismic, or even 4D seismic. But at least we know we need it. So here I've mentioned to you that we are monitoring specific spot location, and we can actually have different kind of spots. For this kind of spots, so you just saw that we can have the conformance spots that will monitor the CO2 front and tell you if the hypothesis of the flow model will are accurate. You can have a control spot that's outside of the area of review, just to make sure that you have no detection of this one. And of course, you'll have a calibration spot at this injection well to detect the CO2 and identify the signature of the CO2 injection. Then you can have a lot of other kind of spots. You have the guardian spots when you have fault, when you have leak points that you can identify from the risk analysis that you've done on the field. And then the last one, when you have an abandoned well, which is quite often the case when we are injecting into depleted kind of fields, you could have a guardian spot to know early enough if the CO2 is going towards this risk. And if not, then you might not need to make a recompletion of the well. So that's an investment that you won't have to do. And thanks to the spot location, you could know if you need to do it and when you need to do it. So that's how we can address a different type of risk. You have the confinement, the containment, and thanks to that, you can also use the spot as an insurance that your CO2 is not crossing the border from a political border, from a license border, and so on, to ensure that your CO2 plume stays within the area of review. So that's how you can know when and where to monitor and take action on the field. Well, is that clear for everyone online? And do you have any question of the things that I have just described here?
There is no question on the Q&A. Maybe I have several. Will you talk about the processing that need to be performed after this acquisition? Okay, so that was my question.
Yes, thank you. So I will not spend too much time about the processing that will happen after the acquisition, but I have like 3 slides about how can we know where to locate the source and the receiver, because this is critical. And for the processing part, we have many papers on that, but I will show you some results actually on a field.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So you can see here that geophysics can adapt to the new challenges that we have with the CCS industry. We can adapt by using less truck on the field. We can adapt by any evolution from the population. Well, and we know that we have an increasing number of people on Earth. We have more and more cities that will expand. We need to be mindful about how we will monitor what's happening on the ground. We need to keep up with innovation. That's why Spotlight is not an equipment company. We want to be able to use any kind of equipment available. So if tomorrow we have better types of receivers, hydrophones, seismic source, then we want to be able to use it. And yes, we need to have a cost that is acceptable. So we might need to rethink the way we are doing things, and that's how sometime maybe having the oil and gas company building this monitoring strategy, maybe that's not the best solution, because they will not have the best outcome out of this monitoring strategy, well, compared to the oil and gas. So we need to think of how we can make this a reality while still making revenue somehow, but we will never make as much revenue on a seismic monitoring strategy as we can do it on the oil and gas, because the outcome of it will never be the same. And then in the end, one big difference between the oil and gas and the CCS is the transparency that we need to have. We are monitoring a risk. We are injecting CO2, so we need to stay accountable for what we are doing. We need to provide information that we know what's happening, that we know that the CO2 is safely stored, because otherwise it has no point about storing CO2. So we need to have a transparent way to show to the regulation, the certification, the public, that we are monitoring what's happening and everything is safe. And if something is not going according to plan, we have specific actions that we can take. So in a nutshell, you can see here the few projects that we've worked on, because the Spotlight technology is actually used today. It is used onshore, it is used offshore as well. We have many results and paper. Well, and you can see all of the clients that we are working with today. And I will show you the onshore results today on the Weyburn field. But just because I will focus on the onshore, for the offshore kind of operation, we've done it twice already in the North Sea. We can use simpler kind of equipment to do the acquisition. And the huge advantage of the spot seismic is that we have only a few source location and a few receiver location, so we can make an acquisition in less than a day. So if we can do an acquisition in less than a day, then we can choose one specific day where the weather is the best, meaning that we can perform an acquisition during winter while in the North Sea. And that's what we've done on the Greensand project and on the UK project as well. We were able to have a seismic acquisition, a seismic campaign during winter, because between two storms, you will always have one window of opportunity with a perfect weather. So that's the kind of agility we can unlock by rethinking the kind of geophysical monitoring that we can do. So let's speak quickly about how we can make the spot seismic a reality and how we did it. So first, we need to have data on the field. We need to have a 3D seismic or a 2D seismic, because this will tell us where to locate source and receiver. Then we can outsource the acquisition campaign to local companies to perform the acquisition. Then, of course, we have the detection phase, and we have specific processing, because we don't have the same amount of seismic data as the geophysical industry. So we had to build specific detection sequence to detect the CO2. Well, and in the end, the objective is to have a traffic light system to tell quickly, when and early enough, where the CO2 is, and if we have a match with the forecasted CO2 plumb. So yes, first, I just wanted to reassure you, we are not going to monitor specific spots in the field without, well, any knowledge of the field. We need to have a first seismic. This first seismic was done using thousands of source and receiver. Well, then the whole idea is to analyze the seismic with all of the source and receiver and to pick the best antenna to monitor specific spot location. So here you have the flow model to know where and when we need to monitor. You have the 3D seismic, so we can demigrate each spot location to come back to all of the source and receiver location that saw the spot in the storage. Then, thanks to that, we will go back to the raw seismic traces for each of these source and receiver combination. So you can see here that we are building what we call the common spot gather. So this is not a CIG, this is not a CMP. This is really raw seismic traces with no processing applied that has only one thing in common. They all see the spot, well, in depth or in time. So all of the overburden reflection, the underburden reflection, they are not the same. The travel of the waves are not the same, but they all meet as a spot location. And you can see here the reservoir layer. It's bad in the nearest offset because this is an onshore case, so we have ground roll. And well, if we go too far, we lose energy. So we need to find the best source and receiver location, and that's where the optimum selection comes into play. Based on the signal-to-noise ratio criteria, we will end up to a few set of source and receiver location per spot. And out of these few source and receiver location, we will choose only one that will match with the GIS recommendations that we have, because we still need to avoid roads or homes, and so on. So that's why we keep a few traces to choose the optimal source and receiver location to detect the CO2 arrival. So we do that for each spot. This is an automatized process, so we can do it quite quickly and provide an acquisition design to the client. And this is what you can see here. You can see that we had 16 spot locations, and we had 14 sources and 16 receiver locations. It was in Canada. We were using dynamite, and we were using geophones as receiver. So that was for the survey design part. How can we know where to locate source and receiver? Because we cannot place them just like that. No, we need to have prior information on the field. Do you have any question on this survey design phase? Because I know this is quite new in the geophysical industry.
Yes, it seems to be okay.
Great, thank you, Luisa. Then I will continue to the next phase, which is the acquisition, and then the detection results. So for the acquisition, you can see a few set of equipment that we are using in different fields. So you can see an offshore acquisition, of course. You can see the type of receivers that we've used in the Middle East. We are using just a few of them per spot location. And you can see that we are using only the small vibro-sized truck. We don't need to have a really powerful source, because we have only just a few set of source location. So we will vibrate several times, at the same source location, to increase further the signal-to-noise ratio by stacking all of this source location. For a regular type of 3D seismic, we don't have the time to repeat each sweep for each source location. But for the spot seismic, we can afford like 20 minutes to vibrate several times. And yes, we can have an acquisition in winter, we can have an acquisition in summer, because you will inject CO2 with no regards to the season during the year. So we should be able to monitor when in any kind of weather. Here, we were able to detect the CO2 on 6 spot locations. And you can see that we have horizontal wells actually on this field. And we can see the extent of the CO2 plume on two locations mainly. Well, on all of the other spots, so the 10 other spots, the CO2 was not yet in these areas. And it was a match with the flow model output that they had at that time. We have several papers illustrating the results that we had on this project in Canada, and several on the North Sea as well.
Can I ask you a question on this case study? So how long was the acquisition you had on this one?
For this acquisition, it was a few hours. So in less than a day, well, it was done.
Okay, so you spend maybe one day placing the different spots and the source, or
yes,
all the spots, and then you acquire. Okay, it's very, very quick.
Yes, in a few hours. So we knew the spot location from the reservoir model and the flow model. We have the spot, we do the survey design. We see where to have the source and the receiver. We mutualize some source location to see multiple spots with it. And then the acquisition company goes on the field, and it takes less than a day in that case, and they can do the 14 source location and 16 receiver location. It was really quick because it was dynamite as well, so only one shot was enough in that case. But for any acquisition of Spotlight, one constraint that we try to have and that we have on all of our projects is to be able to perform an acquisition in less than a day, well onshore, well and offshore as well, because this is critical to have a quick CO2 detection, a frequent CO2 detection, well, and to have an information whenever we need it. And if you need 2 days, 3 days to do it, then it's becoming a little tricky to have an acquisition offshore. So that's why 16 spot location, yes, in less than a day, that's entirely possible. 20 still possible. And then if you need really to have a lot of spot on your field, then maybe the spot seismic is not the best technology to answer 60 spot location. It's not the spirit. You should have some critical spot locations that will enable to have an acquisition in less than a day. And yes, just to wrap up on the acquisition, to see the advantages of the spot seismic compared to doing a conventional seismic. So of course, we don't provide the same information. The conventional seismic will provide a full image of the field, will provide a quantification and so on. The spot seismic will tell where the CO2 is based on the spot location. But by doing that, you can have an information that is frequent, you can have societal acceptability, and you can use smaller kind of source and so on. Well, as soon as we go towards the spot seismic, we can decrease all of the parameters of a seismic acquisition. And that's how we can have an acquisition several times a year to have a monitoring and know quickly enough what's happening on the field. So today we are working in a kind of service product, and we can support a CCS project during their final investment decision, and we can build a monitoring plan for them to support their submission. And with this report, we will provide the societal acceptability side to show that it's quite easy to monitor the CO2 plumb on the field. We will deliver as well a price and so on, and an acquisition setup that is viable on the field and sustainable for many years during injection. And also, which is key, we will provide the agility that is necessary to be able to monitor a field for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, because the spot seismic is only on the processing side. We can use any kind of equipment. We can use the newest receiver on the market, source and so on. So just by monitoring spots, we can ensure that we will be able to do it for many decades to come. And that was the end of the presentation. And just to tell you, we are a French-based company. We are present in North America as well, in Houston. And we have many projects in Europe, in North America, and more and more clients. And we are a team of 20 spotlighters, and we just completed a fundraise of 6.2 million euros to build this software company that relies on the spot seismic as a monitoring technology for the CCS industry. And that was all for me. Do you have any question on the technology? Thank you. Thank you, Paola. Yes, Evelyn, I can see you have one question, and Mario as well.
And Paola, do you agree we liberate the microphone to everybody? We are 7, so I think it could be okay. Perfect.
So thank you, Elodie. Thank you for your kind presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Okay. And And have you got an example of the case studies of an offshore? Of an offshore? Then
Yes.
because I heard that there is a quickie monitoring in a few days, but I can't understand what you do in for monitoring.
Okay. So unfortunately,
Yeah.
Tell me.
Which kind of technique you used in the offshore?
For offshore.
If you have
So
experience in offshore, if you have experience in.
yes, so I can tell you just for the offshore, because I don't have the slide here, but for the offshore, what we are doing, so we are still working on the survey design and spot location in the same manner as for the onshore. But offshore, what will change is mainly the acquisition. So is it this point that you are raising here?
Yeah.
Yes, on acquisition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes. So on acquisition, we are not using a seismic vessel. We are using the boat that you can see here, that is kind of blurry. This is a supply vessel. So this is a vessel that is already charted from the operator, because they are doing daily trips from the platform and deliveries to the platform. And so they have this kind of this kind of boats on the field for all the time, actually. And we are using the same boat to perform the seismic acquisition. So the first decrease in cost is because we are using a supply vessel that is already available. They don't have to pay for it. And we just need to review all of the supply vessels they have and to choose the ones, and they can do it most of the time. They can take a few equipment on board to perform the seismic acquisition, which still takes less than a day. So that's the first point, supply vessel. Then we are using a small type of source, which is a containerized source. On the Green Sun project, we were using a trigun source, 600 cubic inch, and they could deploy the source from the back of the deck with an automatic arm. So that was for the source, and for the receiver, we are using nodes, and we can drop them from the vessel. So we can drop them from the boat for them to fall at the right location. And we can do that because we are in the North Sea. The water depth is not too much, so we can afford to just drop the nodes at the right nodes location.
Okay. And did you have deployed the station like OBS or something like that on the sea floor or not?
We dropped nodes from, so it was TGS doing the acquisition. So it was OBN, yes, with a hydrophone and a free component. And on the last acquisition we've done in the UK, it was another type of nodes, but still OBN that we could just place at each receiver location. So it's an ocean bottom node with several components, but the spot seismic is working with a hydrophone component today, and we were able to detect CO2 on the Green Sun project successfully.
Okay. Thank you, Elodie.
Thank you very much for your question. And I know for the offshore, it was really a big question on how to make it possible. So it's really important to show that we can rethink seismic acquisition. If we are using less equipment, then we can do a seismic acquisition differently.
Yes.
Is there any other question? So maybe I can go for one. What is when you show us a map with the evolution of, in time of an information that was red to blue? What was this information?
Yeah, good question. So this one.
Yes,
let's
exactly.
go to this one, like that. So this is the CO2 saturation, but not just the CO2 saturation. This is the edge of the CO2 plumb. So this comes from the saturation month by month, but we just highlight the new cells of CO2 that where the CO2 is going. So you can see the edge of the CO2 plumb, and you can see that the more red it is, then you have more CO2 in this area, which is why I was highlighting this month number 5 here, because you can see that we have a really red area, which means that the majority of the CO2 is supposed to go towards this direction.
And can we compare this with if we are doing a 3D acquisition, then a 4D monitoring in a field, and we compare the residual between the 3D and the new data? Is it same kind of information? Not exactly, because the saturation isn't a difference of amplitude, but is it something comparable?
So that's possible, and we've done it on this field, actually, not on this one, on the Canadian one. We can use the 3D seismic as a baseline for the spot seismic. I'm not sure if it was your question, but we can use the antenna that was in the 3D seismic. We can use this one as a baseline for the spot acquisition, and then compare the CO2 arrival compared to the baseline. But in some cases, the 3D baseline is not good enough, and the repeatability is not good enough. So we need to have a new spot baseline. But in Canada, it was good enough to use as a baseline, and we can see the difference in amplitude and time shift compared to this optimal antenna from the 3D seismic baseline. And we can still have the same kind of attribute, yes, time shift, amplitudes, but we cannot yet quantify the information, just like you could do with 4D seismic.
Okay.
We can just say, well, if we detect CO2 or not, for now.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know if there is no other question. Maybe we will wrap up. So thank you very much, Elodie, for your time and for this very refreshing presentation. I think it's a nice new point of view. We always want to have more data and more detail and more quality, but maybe it's not necessary, and the impact is incredible on the floor and on the subsea also. So it's a very nice innovation you presented. Thank you everybody for your participation. And as Paula said at the beginning, this webinar will be available on the SCG platform.
Thank you very much for having me here and for coming to this presentation, everyone. And have a nice afternoon or a nice evening.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.